There we go. Perfect. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here this evening. Sound okay in the room? Yeah? Wayne, good in your corner? A little fuzzy. Okay, that might be my enunciation. I shall endeavor. Loud enough though, huh? Loud and fuzzy. Online you can hear? Okay. Yay. Well, I don't know if you've been following the news lately. And no judgment if you haven't, as it's pretty hard to take. But last Wednesday, I guess more or less while we were here, maybe a little bit before, there was a killing of a 37-year-old woman in Minneapolis named Renee Good by a federal agent. And as far as anyone can tell from initial information, everything's shot on cell phone videos now that happens. It seemed to be completely unjustified, if a killing is ever justified. And the leaders of our current federal administration are staying true to form and blaming the victim. So I wanted to name this. I'm sorry to bring it up, but I think we need to. Renee Wood was married, mother of a young child. So why don't we start our talk with a moment of silence and bring up the hope that there will be less of this oppression and violence in our world one day. Because for sure, the three poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion are right in front of us, so clear right now. And the Dharma helps, right? So let's continue our Dharma studies. But knowing that we don't do this in some kind of bubble, right? We're doing this in the world. So I'm continuing to really enjoy, I hope other people are too, going through the chant book very carefully and thoroughly, and especially spending a little more time on the short chants, which I never had before. The longer ones kind of get your attention, right? Because they're like sutras and teachings, but everything's a teaching. And what I'm on now is the 3 refuges, which are on here twice. And you're welcome to look at your book in these talks. Luckily you have the notes, you know. At the bottom of page 2 in Pali, and on page 3 in one form in English, laid out for our morning services, which we're now doing on Sundays, where there's a little call and response, through which we chant the 3 refuges, which are taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and then written out just as one verse on page 4. This is the earliest Buddhist chant from the very beginning. And maybe some of you were here or noticed on the website, in mid-December, Desiree also gave a talk on the Triple Refuge, and her talk is wonderful, well worth listening to, rich in her journey and other teachers' reflections. So check that out too. But I'm on a quest, so I'm going to do it too, you know. Hope that's okay. Luckily, this stuff bears endless repeating, right? We just bring it up over and over again, and we always learn something new, see something new. Desiree's talk is on the website, and blessings to our wonderful program administrator, Annie, who gets the talks up there very quickly. So pretty much if you miss a Wednesday or Sunday, the next day, usually, she has the talk up there. So you don't have to miss anything if you want to keep track. And it's also all on our YouTube channel now, too. We're so high-tech. A little bit easier on the phone on YouTube. So here's an early verse talking about this early teaching on taking refuge. This is a couple of verses, actually, I think maybe two verses from an early Buddhist teaching poem called the Dhammapada. They go to many a refuge, to mountains and forests, to parks and tree shrines, people threatened with danger, they go to many a refuge. That's not a secure refuge, not the supreme refuge. That's not the refuge having gone to which you gain release from all suffering and stress. But when, having gone to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha for refuge, you see with right discernment the Four Noble Truths. Stress, the cause of stress, the transcending of stress, and the noble eightfold path, the way to the stilling of stress. That's the secure refuge. That's the supreme refuge. That is the refuge having gone to which you gain release from all suffering and stress. Stress here, translation of dukkha, suffering, but interestingly this translator did suffering and stress at the end there, but that's okay. In the earliest Buddhist teachings, it's also said when the Buddha first formalized the process for becoming a monk or a nun, for ordaining, for really committing your life to practice, that was pretty much the whole ceremony. He recited the three refuges. And maybe some of you were here for, we had a few recent priest ordinations, Rezala and Seishin, and that was in their ordination ceremonies, but with a lot more fleshing out, you know. But early on, the Buddha started simple, you know, and just elaborated as he needed to, as he went, and then a couple thousand years later, of course, there's some more elaborating that would happen. But he would have chanted them in a language a lot more like Pali than like English. He didn't, in fact, speak Pali. That arose later in Indian history. A language called Prakrit, a dialogue of that from his local area called Magadhi. But it probably sounded a little bit like when we chant it in Pali, which we will do this evening. And you can see it there on the bottom of page 2. And to me, it's one of the most beautiful things we do, maybe because of the contrast of all this sort of monotone and black and white, and, you know, there's a certain aesthetic in the Zen hall, right? But then after doing that all day, in the evening of a retreat or in the evening tonight, we do this beautiful melodic chanting of the refuges in Pali. It's called Tisarana in Pali, which just means 3 refuges. I especially think of our sesshin that we have a couple times a year at a church camp on Samish Island. And there's a great big building that we use for our zendo there. And sometimes we have a lot of people, 40, 50, occasionally even a little more. And all of us singing together in the evening Buddham Saranam, like that. Yeah, we'll practice it. Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's so beautiful, don't you think? Maybe because you're a little sense deprived from a full day of silence. I don't know, but kind of like how food tastes after you've been backpacking. But I think actually it's objectively really beautiful. A little more history. I find this interesting. The first formal ordination the Buddha did using the three refuges or the three treasures, or three refuges either way, appears to have been actually with his son Rahula. He had a few disciples already, but before this, he pretty much just said, okay, you're in, You pretty much just look at him and say, okay, you're a monk now. But then they formalized it a little bit with his son. This is the son that he left behind. So this is a troubling part of the Buddha's story. A friend of mine lived in Thailand for a while, and he said the Thai Buddhists really have a hard time, especially because they have such a family-oriented culture, that the Buddha, to go off and do serious studies of the way, left his young son and his wife, his son's mother, behind for years, some number of years, 6 years by most accounts. And then he's wandering back home as the Buddha with a couple of students in tow, and he meets his wife and son and also his father for the first time. And his son is understandably shy. I think he was, I don't know, 2 or 3 when Prince Siddhartha left, and so then he would be, whatever, 12 or something. I don't know what the ages were exactly when he got back. That didn't add up. Maybe he was 6 and 12. Who knows? So his son is a little shy about meeting him, but his mom, the Buddha's wife, Yasodhara, urges him forward, telling him, that is your father, Rahula. Go and ask for your inheritance. Interesting opener. Go and ask for your inheritance. So young Rahula musters his courage and goes up and says to the Buddha, your shadow is pleasant, O monk. Interesting greeting. Huh? Your shadow is pleasant. Just trying to make contact, I guess, right? What would you do, Your father vanishes and then comes back like this famous holy guy. Well, it doesn't actually seem to work. The Buddha starts to walk away. So Rahula gets up his energy, gets more direct, and follows behind the Buddha, saying, a little more insistently, give me my inheritance, monk. Give me my inheritance. So, Buddha turns to one of his 2 earliest disciples, Sariputta, and tells him, give Rahula the going forth, meaning, okay, ordain him. I guess that was his inheritance. Not money, the Dharma. But Shariputra doesn't know how to do that. They don't have a procedure for this. And maybe he's a little shocked, actually, by his teacher's conduct. That's possible. I like to hope so. How about like acknowledging your son? So Shariputra asked the Buddha, how do I give Prince Rahula the going forth? And the Buddha explains, we will give the going forth by means of the 3 refuges. Shave the head and beard, put on the saffron robe, and, after paying homage at the bhikkhu's feet, the monk's feet, so doing a prostration, that's paying homage at their feet, then the new monk or nun puts their palms together, and they should say, and this is all listed out in the early text, they should say, I go to the Buddha for refuge, I go to the Dharma for refuge, I go to the Sangha for refuge. And then, for the second time, I go to the Buddha for refuge. For the second time, I go to the Dharma for refuge. For the second time, I go to the Sangha for refuge. And then, for the third time, I go to the Buddha for refuge. For the third time, I go to the Dharma for refuge. For the third time, I go to the Sangha for refuge. And then that's that. You're a monk. Done. And to finish this little scene, they do this, Well, no, we haven't done it yet. The Buddha explains what's going to happen. The Buddha says, this is how we're going to ordain Rahula. And then the Buddha's father, Suddhodana, who is Rahula's grandfather, gets upset. Do you know there was this family drama in the Buddhist teachings? This is too much, he says. He lost his son to this new religion, the Buddha, in front of him. Also his nephew Nanda, the Buddha's cousin, joined the order early. And now he's going to lose his grandson Rahula to this new monastic religion. So he says, according to the writings, it's too much. It's too much. Because love for our children, Lord, goes deep. It cuts into us. It cuts into our skin, cuts into our flesh, cuts into us down to the bone. And that pain never goes away when we lose our children. It would be good, Lord, if the Venerable Ones did not give the going forth without the parents' consent. And so the Buddha, this was the Buddha's M.O., he gave an inspiring Dharma talk. And I guess Yasodhara, or Suddhodana, his father, the king, was helped by this, was supported by this, because he withdrew peacefully from the scene. The talk isn't included, whatever the Buddha said, but it must have been inspiring and clarifying. And then the Buddha created one of the first monastic rules. So at first they didn't really have rules, and as you may know from other talks and stuff, modern day monastics, and we're sort of not really quite monastics in the Zen order, but modern day monastics have hundreds of rules, very strict and rigid rules. Michael and I were talking about people in the orders today. There's Americans ordained in monastic orders that have hundreds of rules. And not touching money, only eating food that's put into your bowl by somebody else. Lots and lots of rules to really support a life of practice, full-time practice. But at the beginning they didn't have any of these rules. And the Buddha would add new rules when something went wrong. It was like responsive. So this is one of the first one. What the Buddha says now is, Bhikkhus, from now on, you should not give the going forth to children without their parents' consent. If you do that, you commit an act of wrongdoing. So he made the first rule, but the person who violated the rule was him. One of his titles, then and now, was the perfect one, but clearly he was also still a human being and made mistakes. It's almost like there are two Buddhas in this little story, right? The human Buddha who's feels awkward and baffled at reuniting with his family, and kind of clunkily ordains his son on the spot without asking anybody, including asking his son if he wants that. And the wise awakened Buddha who realized that's no good, shouldn't do it that way, So let's make a rule. Presumably the Buddha followed his rule from then on. Of course, he didn't have any more children to ordain, so we'll never know. So I thought you'd want to know that there's this complex story behind this beautiful little chant, The words in Pali, which, like I say, were close to what Rahula would have recited, and you can look at these if you like, are Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Sangham Saranam Gacchami. And you can hear Buddha Dharma Sangha at the beginning. The is a modifier to say that's the object of the sentence. So this is about Buddha, and this is about Dharma, and this is about Sangha. Saranam means refuge or shelter, a place you can go where you're safe. It's from a root word, Pali root sur, which means to protect. So a place of protection, a place of safety. And the word was also used just like for your house, you know. You could live in a saranam. So we have a Buddha house, you know, a Buddha refuge, a Dharma refuge, and a Sangha refuge. The last word is the interesting one, the verb at the end of the little sentence. Gachami, gachami, comes from the root word gam, meaning to go. So we're going to refuge. And ami is a suffix that turns out to indicate first person singular. So I go. So it's a conjugated verb. I go. So Buddha refuge I go, Dharma refuge I go, Sangha refuge I go. But then the cool thing is this word to go, gam, also means entering into understanding. It also means learning. So we're going there and we're understanding something. We're going there and we're realizing something. So to go to Buddha's refuge with understanding. To go to the Dharma refuge with understanding. With wisdom, maybe, you could say. So isn't that nice? So really literally it'd be a little more like to the Buddha I go for refuge, with this idea of it's with awareness and understanding. To the Buddha I go for refuge. And then you probably already know or easily have guessed, dutiyami means the second time. Tatiyami means the third time. So we are literally chanting just what Rahula and the other early monks chanted in their ordination ceremonies, word for word. And 3 times is important. Repeating things 3 times was really important in early Indian culture, maybe in lots of cultures. That's when you really mean it. You know, just saying something once or twice, not so much, you know. And there's lots of fun stories too in these early teachings where somebody asks the Buddha a question and he ignores them. You ask again, he still ignores you. You ask the 3rd time, then entire Dharma talk is produced and passed down through the generations, you know. And a few times it even says that, like, oh, since you asked 3 times, okay, you know, I'll tell you. So in English, we end up with take, which sounds fine in English, right? I take refuge. Well, maybe it sounds right because we've chanted it a lot that way. It's really not the right word, is it? We don't take anything. What would we be taking? And who's doing the taking? You can't take Buddha, you know. Can't take Buddha's refuge. You're lucky if Buddha lets you in. You know, you're not taking anything. And so the other, we can triangulate a little bit with what they did in Chinese. So the other one, where we chant, I take refuge in Buddha before all beings, immersing body and mind, awakening true mind, that whole bit. So this is actually a translation from Chinese, and the Japanese have their way of saying it as usual. It's 4 character lines. And I'm going to see, we have a projector this week. I'm going to see if I can share this with you, because it's kind of interesting. So I have to like join the meeting, and then I can screen share, I think. I mute myself. Now there's going to be 2 of me up there.
Recording in progress.
Hi, other me. I gotta mute. There we go. Turn that off. Okay. Oops. Hold on. There we go. Okay. You can still hear me in here, right? Okay. Good. Yeah. Everything's working. I'm still hearable online. Kate looks a little blank. Can you hear me? Okay. Good. Okay. Good. 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 All right. Because my screen's saying you can't be heard, but that's a different. So if you're seated along the wall, you could move or just not worry about it. Up to you. Because I'm going to put something on the screen here. Hold on. Oops. Yeah, there we go. Zoom. Share. There. Or you can do good yoga. Bump. Oh, look at that. That worked. Well, I believe you can see it online and we can see it in here. Huh? Amazing. So we won't do translation lab tonight because that would take too long, but maybe another time we will. I just want to highlight a few things here. So on the left we have the Chinese, and one thing just to know is this Chinese is behind everything, and it has this wonderful kind of tidiness, you know. So each of these is 4 lines of 4 characters each. And how it's pronounced in Sino-Japanese, Jike Butsu Togan Shujo Taige Daido Hotsumu Joi. So that's what they would actually chant in a Japanese monastery, because they wouldn't be chanting in English. And then we have the same pattern, mostly repeated, the first couple lines repeated for Dharma, first couple lines repeated for Sangha. But let's stay with Buddha to start. So a couple things I want to underline. One is this first line, Ji Kie Butsu. Desiree mentioned in her talk on the refuges how much when she enjoyed when she was sewing her rakusu. We do this sewing practice, you know. We do a little I take refuge chant to ourselves in Japanese, where we say Kie Butsu, except instead of saying Ji, we say Namu, which means honor. So we say honor refuge in Buddha, and here it says I refuge in Buddha. But Kie also doesn't say take. Take is just an English thing. Kie, which is the middle 2 characters here, these 2 in the middle. I can make this bigger, huh? There, woo, yeah. Kie, these middle 2 characters, ki and a. So you kind of have to know a little bit of Japanese for how the things get divided up, because it's not obvious at all in the romanization. That G here is 1 character, ki is another, and e is the 3rd. How would you ever know that, right? And Butsu is 1, you know. Butsu is just this one. So ki, I gotta remind myself here, means return, I think. Let me just double check. I'm not blowing smoke here. Yeah, ki means return, and e means rely. So it doesn't say take. It says, I return and rely Buddha. So maybe I return to Buddha and rely on Buddha. Return to my reliance on Buddha. Yeah, I rely on Buddha. That is where I return. And we end up with I take refuge. And, you know, it's okay, but it's not actually what it says, right? Not actually what it says. The other one that's a little bit different is where we have before all beings, the kind of literal translation is may all beings, and in fact may all beings is much closer to what this second line says too. Nowhere does it say before. The word before is not there. Shujo is sentient beings, and to is like an imperative, like we really want to do something, and gan is, what is gan again? Forgot. Oh, I wrote it down below here. Hold on. Excuse the blurry movement here. Oh yeah, gan is vow. Gan is vow or desire. So the second line actually means it's really important to me that I vow sentient beings. So may all sentient beings is a lot closer to what it says. And then the rest of it's reasonably close, a little bit of poetic license here and there, you know. Third lines is embody great embodiment of let's see, embody great way, embodying the great way, immersing body and mind, close enough. Giving rise to the supreme mind, awakening true mind, close enough. But the first 2 lines are actually a little bit different, right? So here with Dharma, this is also Kie, right? So I return and rely on Dharma. You know, I return to the Dharma, I rely on Dharma. And we aren't really before all beings, we're just wishing for all beings. May all beings. And then the rest is pretty close. Merciful isn't quite there, but that's okay. Ocean is actually there. I think I just gave somebody an ocean name. You have an ocean name? Somebody has an ocean name. Anyway, ocean is this character here. And then same again with Sangha. I return and rely on Sangha. We should say that to each other when we get here each time, right? Hi, I return and rely on Sangha. How about you? Oh yeah, me too. I returned and rely on Sangha. That's good. And the literal third line here with Sangha is supporting the great assembly, bringing harmony to everyone, close enough, free from hindrance is pretty much spot on. So anyway, I just find it quite fascinating to find out what were they working with when they came up with the English in the 1970s, and some of it did get revised in about 1990, but a lot of it didn't, you know. By then it just was the standard thing to take, you know. It's just America, you know. First thing we thought of, yeah, I'm going to take that. I take refuge. And so that'll probably never be corrected. The big highlight from last week, if you weren't here, was the thing about saving all beings isn't the word for save. Right? It's actually a word that means more like help across, crossing or to help across. So let's turn that off. Oops. Oh, I did. Okay. So, the textual stuff in the history is interesting, but what does it actually mean to you? You know, what does it actually mean to me? We chant this, what are we saying to ourselves and to each other? What is it to take refuge? What is it to return to and to rely on? And going back to that verse from the Dhammapada, do we have a way of looking for refuge in all the wrong places? What would be our true refuge? Our true place of returning and relying? And does it need to be relying on something, or is it just returning and just relying? I'm really excited to hear what you come up with. We'll do a little discussion time in a moment, but I guess for me, provisionally, if I had to say something, maybe something like getting out of my own way. You know what I mean? Getting out of my own way and living in harmony with Buddha. Being Buddha. Getting out of my own way and being fully informed, listening to Dharma. Getting out of my own way and allowing myself to be supported by Sangha and to support Sangha, right? All of these are going both directions, right? So there's something nice about return and rely as opposed to take, in that it has this sense of giving, doesn't it, you know? Not taking. And we're always giving to each other. So what is taking refuge for you? Let's do our little monologue thing. Groups of 3-ish. I think most of us know how this works, and maybe probably at least somebody in your trio will, but it's pretty much sitting together in a little pod of 3, a little apart from everybody else if you can manage it so you don't overhear them so much. Being quiet as we rearrange so we can really kind of stay grounded and in our bodies. That really helps the process. So we're not chit-chatting, we're having an exploration together. And then time turns where one person is speaking, the other two are listening. I'll ring a bell. And the question is, what is this for you? What is taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha? And if you've done this 1,000 times, it's interesting to reflect, you know. And if you're coming here for the first time ever, welcome. Something interesting will come up, I'm sure. And you don't have, there's no right answers here. And your answer could be, I really don't know. I wonder what this could be, you know. Or you know, I thought you guys just did meditation. This is like a religion? I'll see you later. That's fine too. Okay, find yourself a couple of friends.